All right.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Lauren is back with us today. Thank you so much for continuing to do programs for us, Lauren. She is at Maumee Bay State Park as a naturalist there with ODNR.
Perfect. So again, my name is Lauren Stewart, the naturalist here at Maumee Bay State Park, and I'm going to be talking about attracting birds, and we'll be focusing a little bit about winter, especially since 'tis the season, is a little wintry outside, and so specific birds, how to attract them, and then the birds you'll see in winter and what you can do for those winter birds. So the biggest thing is just kind of when you're looking at your yard, how do you get started? And so just basic things. Assess your region. So where are you in Ohio really makes a difference, because Northwest Ohio is completely different from Southern Ohio, as well as assessing your yard. What do you already have there that maybe will attract birds or wildlife? And then how much time you want to put into it. Birding and having a wildscape and attracting birds to your yard can be very, very time intensive. And it also cannot be, just depending on what you're looking for and what level of species that you would like. So here's a bird quick start. It's a lot of information, but basically the main points are providing water year round is a surefire way to attract animals, and birds being the biggest, because we have birds that stay here year round. And the big problem with winter, they actually have harder time finding actual water in wintertime than in summertime when there's drought. It's because the water is all frozen. So providing water year round will really help your winter birds and attract a variety of species. Native plants, just for native animals, are always a surefire way to get things to come to you. Eliminating insecticides. A lot of birds feed on insects, and if you have no insects, you're not going to have anything for them to eat. Keeping dead trees. Dead trees are very important habitat. Now, don't keep dead trees that could be at risk of people or for structures. But if you have a tree that is not going to, if it falls over, it's not going to hit anything, or it's short enough that even if it falls, you're fine, leave it, because it provides habitat for insects, which attract birds, and it can also provide habitat for birds to raise their young in as well. So it's a bonus for sure. If you don't have trees that maybe you want to keep, nest boxes are also a really good way. You can do the typical bluebird, the wren boxes, but you can even do things like screech owls. Screech owls love their nest boxes, and they will use them. Even if you are in an area that's maybe more urban, it's surprising how many screech owls actually live in more urban areas. My in-laws live in West Toledo, Toledo, and they have screech owls in their neighborhood. I've heard them and I've seen them in their neighborhood. So don't rule out the fact that if maybe you're in a more urbanized area, you won't see things like that. You absolutely can and will. Brush piles. Brush piles are actually really important for our feeder birds because it provides them shelter in case a hawk decides they are hungry as well. And then offering other food and feeders can really be beneficial in a variety. So if you can do mealworms and maybe seeds and suet, will really attract a variety of birds. Invasive plants also are a big one. Removing invasive plants can really help your yard, and then replacing them with natives, and then reducing your lawn area. Lawns are only really beneficial for people and the non-native grasses that are planted. Lawns can look great. They can be really fun to have, but they aren't really good wildlife. In a lot of wildlife habitats, the only real wildlife that likes them are Canada geese, and a lot of people don't want giant flocks of Canada geese right there on their front yard lawn, because not only are they, they're a little bit testy, they're feisty in personality, they are excellent at fertilizing your lawn. Oh, I cannot talk today. Lawn and or driveway. So if you don't want a lot of angry geese and filled with a whole bunch of poop in your yard, you might not want lawns. So passive or active birding or attracting birds can be easy, or it can be hard. So I personally like a mix of both, but passive birding, or passive trying to get your yard for birds, is basically planting native plants and providing water. Active is actually providing the food for them. So both of them can be really time intensive, both of them can be really cost intensive, but there's usually a good medium mix of both. So passive birding, native gardening focus, providing habitat, and going of the mantra, if you build it, they will come. So here's some examples of some birding landscapes. These purple flowers right here in the middle, That's purple coneflower. Really good for both pollinators, and goldfinches love to eat their seeds, and then you get pretty flowers to look at. So that's just a bonus plant there. And they're excellent at reseeding themselves. So they not only, you get the flowers, they take care of themselves, and you get to feed the birds along the way. You can even do passive birding with limited spaces. So these are all examples of, they're done on a deck, they're done in a very small yard, or you can even do them in planters. So you might think, well, like if I'm just putting these plants out, like I'm not gonna get birds. Hummingbirds. We can't forget about our hummers. So these pentas in the back here, hummingbirds love them. So just because you have a little bit of, just a little area, if you plant native plants out there, you'll get native pollinators, and you might even get some hummingbirds checking out the flowers that you have. If you have more space. So I really like this. This is on the far left, is an example of a rain garden. So that is a depression in the area. So it is usually pretty wet, and the grass isn't gonna grow there. You're gonna end up with a mud slop. And so trying to mow that's ridiculous. And so what these people did is they just put a rain garden there. So it's a really good, you still get your lawn, but then you have this little nice habitat for birds, for pollinators, and all the other animals. So that's just something to really consider, that you might not want to plant a whole huge wildscape, but you might have an area that doesn't really work for your lawn, and here you go. We also have another example, like this is also a dry creek bed. This is another example of a rain garden that they have as well, and they have some nice daisies and some coreopsis in there as well. That maybe take a little bit more space, don't quite look as manicured, but at the same time, it's excellent habitat. And then here we have a nice meadow with coreopsis, with Blackeyed Susans and a whole bunch of other clovers I see as well, and then a bluebird box. So passive. You don't have to provide food, but you can still attract birds in other ways. So again, I know some of you have heard my native gardening, but more landscape, less lawn and these are some really good books that give you some ideas of how to plan with native plants and wildlife friendly plants. And the great part about native plants is once you plant them, they're supposed to be here. So they're a lot more low maintenance than lawns, because they are already built to be in this soil, to be in this area. So it's a bonus there. So here are some lists. I know most of you have seen these already, but these are some lists of some really good bird plants, and based on their either full to partial sun or shades and shrubs. So we have the highlights are going to be like the Blackeyed Susans. Berries are really good to provide because food for birds right there. So especially in the wintertime, like our robins, they're relying, because there's no real insects because it's way too cold, they're relying on berries and nuts and seeds. And then there's my favorite plant of all, serviceberry. That is an all-in-one, all-star in my opinion. It's very aesthetically pleasing to look at. You get color all 4 seasons. So you get the flowers in spring and late and early summer. You get the berries in summer, and then you get the foliage in fall, and the berries also stick around in winter as well. So you're just getting everything to look at all 4 seasons of the year, which is great. And birds love it. And especially if you're looking for like waxwings, robins, even bluebirds that feed on the berries themselves, you get quite a diversity, and it's also really great for pollinators with all of those flowers. So native plants through the seasons, you want to provide food year round. So if you're doing the passive approach and saying, okay, I just want to plant plants, I don't want to provide food, food can get too expensive, I'm just going to do my native wildscape. You're going to want to think of things besides just the flowers. So you want wild grasses that can kind of look weedy, but they provide seeds, which are really important for a lot of our birds. And they also provide places for them to nest. A lot of our sparrows and even some of our larger birds are actually ground nesting birds. And they use grass clumps basically as kind of camouflage and protection for their ground nests. You want nectar producers. So especially the hummingbirds like the bright red tubular flowers, but Orioles also eat nectar as well. So that serviceberry, oftentimes you'll see Orioles picking at the flowers because they're getting the nectar off the flowers. Goldfinches have been known to get nectar as well. You want some autumn fruits. So dogwoods are a great example of fruits, and then crab apples, also really good fruits for the birds in the winter time, autumn time and winter time. And then you're gonna want some winter fruits. So the crab apples, more in the winter time, sumacs, more in the winter time, as well as like Virginia creeper is a great vine to have, very important for those winter birds. And then of course, nuts and acorns. So all of our big trees, the oaks, the walnuts, the beeches, the hazels, the hickory trees, all of those are really important for our birds that are focused more on the nuts, the higher fatty foods. Again, with the passive, bird baths. Bird baths do not have to be fancy. If you've ever seen robins, they're like, hey, this puddle in the middle of the street looks like a great place for me to hang out. So you don't have to go over the top fancy. You can do definitely lower key for the birds for sure, but you can have the traditional bird bath like the one in the middle. You can use terracotta pots and make your own bird bath down here, or this one's really cool. The one at the top is actually a cast of a leaf that they turned into bird bath and just put it on the ground. Running water will attract more birds and more wildlife. So if you can have a fountain, that's great. But again, birds aren't super picky, and especially in the wintertime, if you throw a heater in there, you're gonna get a lot more birds to that bird bath than you would in the summer. It's really fun to see that birds that are very excited to have running water in the winter. So active birding. You're providing food to entice the birds. Birds typically arrive faster because there is a very, very good positive reinforcement for coming into this yard is because, hey, I get to eat. Typically you get more diversity because you're providing a lot of different types of, if you provide a lot of different types of food, you're gonna get a lot of different types of birds, and you can maintain it through the seasons. Some areas, it might be hard to have those plants that maybe have fruit in the wintertime, maybe have really sandy soil like I do at my house. I'm in Holland. I have literally just sand. So I can't grow crab apples in sand. So I will have to provide more food in the wintertime for those birds, but at the same time, I can get that higher diversity through the seasons because I can't plant the plants necessarily. However, the cons are, it's maintenance. Raccoons will destroy your feeders. Squirrels will destroy your feeders. Sometimes the large birds will destroy your feeders. So you're having to replace your feeders. You get pests, like I mentioned, the raccoons are pests. I personally, if you can find it, you can eat it. That's my mantra. But at the same time, I don't want to spend $50 a week in bird food because I have a raccoon that weighs 30 pounds that is eating all of my bird food. But it's a constant expense, and that's just something that you have to consider. And you also are more likely to have predators in your yard because you have a higher concentration of essentially prey. So that's why having that mix, like providing shelter for the birds, like that brush pile or having dense bushes is really important because it gives the birds somewhere to go if something tries to come and eat them. And the biggest con is a constant expense. I can tell you at Maumee Bay, when we feed the birds during biggest week, we're putting food out twice a day and we're putting a variety of food. We spend almost $500 just on bird food that 1 week. It's crazy how fast it adds up because those birds, man, right after migration, they are starving. And so it can be very, very expensive to feed birds. However, it doesn't have to be. So supplementing with native plants is a really good way to kind of ease your costs. There might be an initial higher upfront cost, but it's a regenerating resource. So you can have food year round that you don't have to pay for each and every time. So here's some examples of bird feeders. So I personally prefer the tube feeders. However, hopper feeders are really good for a variety of species, except with hopper feeders, you get more of the pest species, such as the larger birds like the grackles, the squirrels, and even raccoons can hold on to them. So, but the smaller feeders tend to allow for only the smaller birds, so that kind of helps you narrow down of what birds you're trying to feed. I also like to put food on the ground, especially for my ground feeding birds. There's a lot of birds that prefer the ground, doves being one of them. And the great part about doves, they are so not picky. You literally just throw the food on the ground and they are happy campers. In the wintertime, we have dark-eyed juncos that almost exclusively like to feed on the ground. The only other ones they'll tolerate are tray feeders. So that's just something to consider, that you might have some food that's maybe wasted on the ground that the pest species can get, but at the same time, you get some of our native species loving it as well. So here's the hopper. The hopper is going to usually have a wider roof to it that protects it from the elements. And they have a more open bottom that allows the birds to feed freely from. The house style hopper is usually the more common ones that we use here. It allows like birds like our blue jays to eat that are a little bit bigger and still are more the desired species. However, blue jays can be bullies, so just consider that as well. it allows more of our larger desired species to be able to feed off of. And the birds that don't like the tube style will come to this one. And they come in a variety of shapes. So you can get the smaller hoppers that kind of limit the size of the bird, but at the same time, I trust you, the bigger birds will try on them and you spill the whole entire hopper over. So the tray platform will get you the highest variety of birds. However, the downside of the tray platform is lots of things can eat from it, which here at Maumee Bay, that includes deer. We have deer stand up on their hind legs and basically sweep out all of the food on the tray feeder. However, you can see like right here in the middle, we have a cardinal, we have a goldfinch, and then we have a house finch all feeding from that one feeder. So it attracts a higher diversity of birds. However, with the tray feeder, you have to make sure that tray has some sort of mesh bottom or something that can allow the water to go through so the seeds don't stay wet and get moldy, and that the mold can actually harm the birds as well. So this tray feeder way on the right-hand side looks kind of weird. It kind of looks like a upside down umbrella. That is actually a specialized feeder for fruit. So some of our birds, like especially the Orioles and even the rose-breasted grosbeaks, like to eat fruit, or they like to eat jelly. So we put jellies on there, and we put like almost not rotting fruit, but overly ripe fruit on there that the birds like to eat. So that one doesn't have drainage, so that has to be changed every single day. And that's one thing with the bird feeders, you have to maintain them and check on the seeds as well, because seeds may be sitting there for a long time and they'll go bad. So that is just something to consider when you're doing the active style of feeding. So the tube feeders. The tube feeders limit the birds based on the size. So you can see, you can still have quite a diversity of birds. I really like the one in the middle because it has the really small hole openings for the thistle seeds on the far left, the bigger holes for the sunflower seeds, and at the far right, it has the peanut style feeder so the woodpeckers can get it too. So you can still get that diversity of food, but just limit the birds that you can get to eat there. So you're not getting grackles or blue jays on those feeders because they're too big to hold them, the thing will sway. But at the same time, you're still getting the diversity of the woodpeckers, the goldfinch, and even this junco is deciding he wants to try out and eat it as well. So the tube feeders are really good, especially if you're aiming for the smaller birds. Goldfinches, they eat almost exclusively off tube feeders. They will feed on tray feeders, but they prefer the tube feeders, and they prefer the food on the far left, which is thistle, which is a very expensive seed that goes bad very quickly. So if you're feeding thistle and you don't know if you have a lot of goldfinches in your area, I highly recommend don't putting a whole bunch out, because essentially it'll just go to waste. So just do small amounts until you know that you have a big flock of goldfinches, and then you can add more each time. So on to our specialty feeders. So the Orioles actually have, they are in the springtime, they are trying to eat and get as many calories as they can during breeding season, because it takes a lot to breed and it takes a lot to lay eggs. So they have to really amp up their feeding. And so they actually will feed on nectar and feed on fruits in the early spring migration. And this feeder on the far left is actually an Oriole feeder, which is basically a modified hummingbird feeder with just a bigger opening for the Oriole to put its beak in. And they eat, they drink nectar just like hummingbirds do, but they do not need the higher sugar ratio that hummingbirds do. Their metabolism isn't crazy like hummingbirds. Hummingbirds literally have such a high metabolism, they have to go into a mini hibernation every night so they don't burn all the calories and die in their sleep. Orioles don't have that problem. So they need about a fourth of the amount of sugar that hummingbirds do, but they love nectar, and they will definitely not hesitate to eat hummingbird style nectar either. But we often see them in the springtime feeding on oranges and feeding on grape jelly. So this feeder in the middle is an Oriole orange and grape jelly feeder. And again, especially as it gets warmer, you have to be really careful and cognizant of the food and the temperatures, because grape jelly can go bad very quickly. Though if it's the height of migration season, that grape jelly will be gone. Also, things like possums and raccoons and squirrels will also eat that grape jelly. So you might notice that, my grape jelly is disappearing every night. It's because you have a raccoon that is eating your grape jelly. But most of the time, the oranges are left alone by most birds. So usually you're pretty good with oranges. Orioles will demolish oranges almost every day. So that's something that you just have to constantly keep track of. as well. And I always tell people, never feed birds food that you won't eat. So if the orange is moldy, don't feed it to the birds. If it's overly ripe and squishy, you can probably feed it, but if it has mold growing on it, don't feed it to the birds. Same with grape jelly. Now, hummingbirds have a variety of different types of feeders. The biggest thing with hummingbirds, because they will eat nectar year round, that's what they eat. In the summertime, you have to be super careful about how much food you put in there and how long you leave it out. A good rule of thumb, if it's hot, you have to change it every day. If it's warm, but not like over 80, every other day is a good one. And you don't have to use the red dye. The red dye, they'll come to it, but they will come to the clear dye just as much because of that red base is what attracts them. So you don't have to add dye to the food. They'll eat the clear food just fine. So a little bit about our undesirable visitors. There's a lot of different methods to keep them out. Greasing poles is one of my favorites. You can actually grease the poles with lard or Crisco. And so the squirrels will try to climb up those poles and they'll slide right back down. That's good in the wintertime because it doesn't get rancid, but that's not something you want to do in the summertime. I've also seen people that take literally slinkies and put them on the poles and attach to the bird feeder. So the squirrel will climb up, grab the slinky, and the weight of it will bring it back down so he can't ever climb completely up. Putting something at the bottom of the pole before the bird feeder is called a baffle. And that usually is fairly effective. However, squirrels are super duper smart and they're very food motivated. So oftentimes you'll see them, they'll climb trees and just jump on your feeder from the tree. So if you have an area that maybe the squirrels go crazy at, you might need a top baffle and a bottom baffle to keep the squirrels out. So like in the middle here, you see that clear feeder that has the bottom baffle. So as the squirrel tries to go in, he basically slides right off. But if you have an issue where like, okay, the squirrels just keep jumping on this feeder, I got to figure out a way to how to deal with it. The one in the bottom left is a really good way. So essentially they use a really cheap version, it's literally a 2-liter bottle, but you can use any type of bird feeder there. But on the rope, you put little PVC pipes. So if the squirrel tries to walk on it, it rolls right off. And then you also have feeders that are based on weight. So it allows the smaller birds, but the port closes if larger birds get on it. So the far left and the far right, those are both examples of feeders that keep out small mammals as well as large birds. And those are a lot more expensive than the other feeders, but if you're having a huge issue where the squirrels are basically wiping you out of all the food, it's something worth the investment, just because it's going to save you the hassle of having to constantly buy more food and just deal with the squirrels. So another undesirable visitor can be hawks. I'm torn. I love hawks. I don't like seeing them eat my feeder birds, and they always eat the native birds and not the non-native. They're like, we have so many house sparrows. Why are you eating the cardinals? Eat the house sparrows. But they are part of the ecosystem and they're important. But I like getting my feeder birds a fighting chance because they're basically sitting ducks. And so we provide basically brush piles for our birds to go hide in. And on the right-hand side, you can see a hawk trying to actively, it's a sharp-shinned hawk, trying to get into that brush pile, but the hawk is too big and the brush pile is too dense for the hawk to get into. Thus, the small birds are saved once the hawk finally gives up. And hawks, once they know you feed birds, they actively will patrol your yard. So that's just something, if you notice you're getting a lot of hawks, you might want to pause feeding your birds for about 2 weeks and then feed it again after the hawks have moved on looking for other food. The birds will come back. They might not come back immediately, but they will come back to your feeders. But it's better if you're having constant finding puffs of where birds were of feathers. So if you're finding you're having a lot of predation, you're going to want to maybe pause your feeding and provide more brush piles for the remaining birds at your feeder. Squirrels, providing baffles are great, but I always like to distract my squirrels with other food. Here's some examples of squirrel feeders. Corn is a really easy one. Squirrels will go for the corn versus the birdseed. Peanuts are a big one. Squirrels love peanuts. Blue jays love peanuts. Woodpeckers love peanuts. It is worth the investment of peanuts, in my opinion. Squirrels are highly entertaining. And if they're eating the peanuts and not eating your whole sunflower seeds, it's worth it. Same thing with the corn. But you can get big bags of unsalted peanuts. Like there's a little fruit stand just north of us in Michigan called Cholinos. You can get a 50-pound bag for like $15. So you can find larger sources of peanuts that are initially intended for human consumption for the squirrels, but sometimes they can be expensive, especially if you're buying specific bird seed versions of peanuts. But the corn works really well. They have hilarious squirrel feeders. I love the little picnic one because you can get 2 squirrels and it looks like they're having picnic. It cracks me up every time. And then my favorite one, this is a new one. They have animal mask heads that basically they put food inside the mask and the squirrels will stick up and get at it. So if you want to entertain yourself, there are some very entertaining squirrel feeders that can make it a little more entertaining, even though they're eating your bird seed. And specifically for winter feeding and considerations of the birds that you'll find in winter. So what do birds do in winter? Either they're going to migrate, they're going to build fat reserves, they're going to find cavities to deal with it, they're going to use their natural adaptations to keep warm, or they're going to go in a sort of torpor. It's a torpor light in the winter, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So migration. So a lot of birds say, I'm gonna migrate, this is not worth it. And most of the birds that migrate are eating things that are only found seasonally. So like our warblers, they're insectivores. You're not gonna find lots of insects in the wintertime. Our hummingbirds, nectivores. You're not gonna find nectar in the wintertime because nothing is blooming. And our red-winged blackbirds are a mix of insectivores and eating seeds. However, they weigh more heavily to the insects. So it's not worth them staying and trying to find food in the wintertime. So it's a cost-benefit ratio. It takes a lot of energy and it's a high risk to migrate, but these animals would not be able to survive the winter without migrating, so therefore they have to migrate. But come summertime here, it is worth that migration back north because there's an abundance of food and habitat that they need to breed. So migration, some birds choose to migrate. Some birds build up fat reserves. So these birds are all found here in the wintertime. And so what they do is they basically try to get as chunky as possible to get them through wintertime. The white-breasted nuthatch on the left-hand side, those guys are hilarious. They're a very common feeder bird in the wintertime. They're only about as big as my fist. They have a call that sounds like they're laughing at you. They go, ha, 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 ha. And they love suet. Suets are really easy food to make for birds. You can get animal fat, or you can get things like Crisco, vegetable fat, and basically mix it with seeds, let it solidify and chunk it outside, and you'll have some very happy birds. So they're eating high fat things like nuts, suet. In the wild, they're going for those higher fat nuts. So the hickory, the acorns, anything that's small enough to fit in their mouth, they're going to go for. Our titmice, again, same thing as the nuthatches. They're actually related, and they're going to go for eating things that are higher in fat. And so, as you can see, they like peanuts. So that's a really good thing to bring for if you want to attract the little titmice, which are really closely related to chickadees, again, that build fat as well. They're going to eat those peanuts. And our woodpeckers. A lot of times, woodpeckers actually store caches of food. So they'll do peanuts, they'll do other tree nuts, and they'll have them just in areas where they know where they might be. But in particular, our red-breasted woodpecker loves peanuts, and it's really fun to watch them grab the peanut and shove it in some tree bark somewhere and come back and grab more. And you might say, well, it looks like it's a red-headed woodpecker. This is actually a red-breasted woodpecker. Red-headed woodpeckers have completely red heads, while red-breasted have almost like a mohawk without the actual sticking up part, and their belly has a red streak to it. So they look like they're named wrong, but they are truly red-breasted. So staying warm is another thing they have to deal with, and some birds use cavities. So here's our little chickadee on the left-hand side, which are adorable birds that say their name. They go chickadee, dee, 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 dee. So they'll use cavities to stay warm, and they're here all year winter long, and they are smaller than my fist. They are teeny tiny little birds that are able to brave this winter. Some birds, like the mourning doves, they'll actually huddle up and kind of sleep in piles together to stay warm. Our screech owl uses cavities. And then here's an example of a cavity nest box that will be used in the wintertime by a variety of birds as well. Dense foliage is really important. It provides cover from the elements. So if we're getting rain or snow, if they get wet, that actually it's a lot harder to stay warm if you're wet. And so having that dense foliage really helps keep them warmer. So the different adaptations they have to keep warm, feathers being the one. So feathers allow for flight, but feathers are actually great insulators. It helps them actually stay cool in the summertime and warm in the wintertime. They'll basically fluff themselves up and allow that air to come underneath, and they'll kind of trap it under their feathers, which acts as an extra insulation. And the down feathers are really what give them the extra oomph to keep warm. So if you think of like a down-filled comforter, it is a warm, warm comforter, or down-filled jackets that we even use to keep warm. The birds are using it the same way. And so here's my chickadee that's all fluffed up. He basically looks about twice as big as he normally is. And here on the top left is actually a house sparrow. Again, that looks like a round ball, but I assure you it is a bird. So other adaptations, you're thinking, okay, so they have the feathers to keep warm. What in the world are they doing with their feet? You'll see ducks and geese and gulls standing on ice, swimming in frozen, partially frozen water. And I mean, I wear wool socks practically in the summertime. So I'm like, oh, I don't even understand. But it's actually, they have a really cool adaptation of keeping their extremities, especially their feet, warm. And it all has to do with how their blood moves in their body. So essentially, you have oxygenated blood moving out of the heart, deoxygenated blood moving into the heart. And how they have it doing is basically they have the arteries and the veins right next to each other. So the artery, which just came from the heart and the core of their body, which is warm, keeps the blood going back into the heart warm as well. So that exchange basically allows for heat to transfer from one to the other, keeping their cold foot warm with the warm blood from the artery. So basically they use their blood vessels to keep their feet warm, which is really neat because ours is laid out not so closely. That's why our feet and our extremities and our hands and toes tend to get a lot colder than birds that are sitting on the ice, because they have basically a built-in self-warming foot. So torpor, I mentioned the hummingbirds that basically go into a state of hibernation to basically stay alive every night. Chickadees do a similar thing. So chickadees, very teeny tiny little birds, and they, to survive winter, is really hard. You have to generate a lot of body heat to basically stay warmer than it is outside. And essentially torpor is basically, you slow your body down. It's a decreased activity in the animal, and it reduces the temperature and the metabolic rate. So hummingbirds, they have to reduce their temperature about from as much as almost 80 degrees Fahrenheit. They reduce their temperature by almost 80 degrees every night to stay alive. They have a really high body temperature. It is much higher than humans. But chickadees, they kind of do the same thing in the wintertime. At night, they reduce it about 22 degrees. So they're going from the mid-hundreds to closer to the 80s. So that's how they're able to basically not need as much energy to stay warm at night, because everything's slowing down for them. So it allows them to preserve energy to last longer and to get longer between periods of food, because food is a lot more scarce in the wintertime. So conserving as much energy is really, really important. So next, we're going to go on to birds that you'll specifically find at your feeders in the wintertime. And these are all birds that are very common here in Ohio in the wintertime. And some of them you specifically only see here in the winter. So mourning dove, here year round, they are abundant. They are going to be the ground feeding birds. They are garbage disposal birds. They'll pretty much eat anything. So you don't have to get super fancy seed for mourning doves. But a good seed for all birds in Ohio is going to be black oiled sunflower seed, and the mourning doves will eat that, definitely. The red-bellied woodpecker, very common throughout Ohio, super common in Northwest Ohio. They are a fairly large bird. They are about the size of a robin, and they have that bright red, almost mohawk on their head. The males have it from basically the tip of the base of their bill all the way to the back of their nape, the back of their head. The females, it starts midway through their head to the back. So they're a quick, easy one to identify male from female, but they're gonna love the black-oiled sunflower seeds and peanuts. They love peanuts. These two are commonly confused together, and the reason why is they look very, very similar, and especially if you don't see them side by side, it's hard to know which one is which. So the top one is my absolute favorite woodpecker. They are so teeny tiny and cute, the Downy Woodpecker. They are about the size of my fist. They're very small little birds. They have a very small beak compared to their body size. And if you know what they look like, they're easy to identify by that beak. But if you don't see them and the hairy woodpecker commonly together, it's really hard to distinguish the two. So they, again, are small, about the size of my fist. The hairy woodpecker is about the size of a fist and a half. So it is much bigger than the downy, but it's not so much bigger that it's super easy to immediately tell. But they have a beak that is significant, like you can see it from a distance. It is a large, large beak. But they are both common in the same areas. You'll find them pretty much in the same habitat, and they are common statewide. So it makes it hard to, you're gonna find them in the same place, they eat the same things, one is just bigger than the other. But the downy woodpeckers are much more common at feeders. They tend to be a lot more tolerant of people. They're tolerant of more human disturbance. So you're gonna see those birds at feeders, and you're gonna see those birds at feeders in more urban areas. The hairy woodpeckers, you'll see them at feeders, but they're more an occasional feeder species rather than almost a guaranteed feeder species as the downy woodpeckers. They both like the black-oiled sunflower seeds, and they're gonna love peanuts as well. And the chickadees. So here in Northwest Ohio, we are getting the black-capped chickadees. Pretty much once you hit that 71, everything south of 71 is going to be the Carolina chickadee. So Northern Ohio, black-capped, Southern Ohio, Carolina. If you're in the middle, you actually can get both, and you can get the hybrids. So it can be really tricky. Up here, we're looking at black-capped. We're too far north to get anything but black-capped. But as you creep closer to, like, say, Findlay, and then you're getting a little bit more towards, like, Norwalk over there, the closer you get to 71, the more likely you're going to get the hybrids of the black-capped and the Carolina. Again, super common feeder birds. They have a little bit of a different call. They look slightly different, but it's hard to distinguish them in the field unless you're hearing them call. Black-oiled sunflower seeds, hands down, is one of the best things to attract chickadees to your yard. Chickadees are very bold, and they get very used to people. They get so bold that you can actually condition them to eat out of your hands. So they're a really cool feeder bird. When we feed the birds full-time in the winter when the nature center is normally open, I actually will have them, they'll hear me come around to go feed them, and they'll yell at me getting ready, and I get them, sometimes they'll land on my heads. They get so excited to eat the food. So they're really, really used to people, and they're a wonderful feeder bird to have for sure. Tufted titmouse, cousin of the chickadee. They're super cute. They almost look like a mini version of a blue jay. And they are super active. Again, live in the same types of habitat chickadees do, and they love the black-oiled sunflower seeds. But they're super cool birds. They're super active and very personable. White-breasted nuthatch. So oftentimes in the winter, you'll find flocks of nuthatches, chickadees, downy woodpeckers, and titmice all together. They live in similar habitats. They eat slightly different foods, but they basically flock together because it is advantageous to find predators. So chickadees are kind of like the guards. They are well aware of everything going on, and they're the town criers. They will immediately call out if there's a potential predator. And so it helps to have multiple eyes, thus the flocks tend to be together. And they often like the same things. Again, nuthatches love black-oiled sunflower seeds. And our state bird, the northern cardinal. Northern cardinals are easy to attract. They're here year-round. They'll eat a variety of foods. And they like safflower seeds and black-oiled sunflower seeds. The nice part, if you're looking just to have cardinals, if you have safflower seeds, the shells are so hard, most birds cannot crack them. So you're looking, the cardinals will almost exclusively get to eat those seeds. So that seed really helps narrow down what birds you're going to get, and it doesn't get wasted maybe on potential non-desired species like the starling or the house sparrow. And the males are the bright red, and the females are gray with tinges of red on their crests and on the wings and tail. And then our blue jay. The blue jays are busybodies. They like to police the other birds and each other. They're really good. They have a really great alarm system. They're very aware of predators, and they like to bully the potential predators. You will know if you have a cat in the area, if you have a hawk in the area, any potential thing that might be a predator, they will let everybody know, and oftentimes they'll dive bomb and try to get the potential predator to go away. They'll mob it. But they're tricky because, so one of the things they can do is they can imitate a red-shouldered and a red-tailed hawk. So they will do that. They'll actually make a hawk call to clear a bird feeder. So the other birds think it's a potential predator coming, and then they'll come and get a feed all on their own without being impeded by other species. So they're pretty tricky. But what's neat here along the north, so blue jays are local migrants. So they don't do big migrations like other birds do. They just do kind of a tiered migration. So the blue jays we see here in the wintertime are actually Canadian blue jays. And so we get really cool migrations of them where they're just moving a couple 100 miles south. And so we'll get huge flocks of blue jays in the summertime, or the springtime, and in the fall when they're going south in the fall and then back north in the spring. So it's really cool to see the difference and the huge, huge migrations. It's very loud when they come migrate, and especially over the lake. Song sparrows, very common. They are going to be ground feeding, so throwing some seeds on the ground. They'll eat a variety of seeds. The millet mix is okay for them, but again, everybody loves black oil sunflower seeds. That's always a good and guaranteed. And then these guys are exclusively here in the fall and winter and a little bit of spring. Typically we start seeing them in late September, early October, and we usually have them all the way through March. So this is the dark-eyed junco. They are tundra species, so they breed in the tundra. And so they're very, very comfortable being in really open areas, because in tundra, there's no trees. And so they're comfortable being in open areas. They feed on the ground, and they are adorable, and they look so, so dapper against that white snow, and they're slaty gray and slaty, almost blue color to them. They're very, very adorable species. Goldfinches. So goldfinches look a little bit different in the wintertime, not quite as vibrant and attractive, but that's because it takes a lot of energy to have those breeding colors. So they're like, we just want to survive winter. I don't need to have my breeding colors. And this is what goldfinches look like in the wintertime, much more drab, better camouflage. But again, they're going to eat thistle. They're going to eat that black. They love the black oil sunflower seed as well. Purple finches and house finches, also winter visitors that we see. Purple finches look like they have been dipped in cranberry juice. House finches look like they have been lightly painted. So if you're seeing a bird that looks a lot more saturated in that kind of cranberry color, it's probably a purple finch. If you see one that is kind of looks like it's just lightly painted, mostly along the head, it's probably a house finch. But they're those much more common in the wintertime. Specifically, the purple finches we'll see in the winter, not so much any other part of the seasons. Our white-throated sparrow, almost exclusively in the wintertime, they're easy to identify. They have this nice white collar underneath their beak. Again, ground feeding, black oil sunflower seed. Our white-crowned sparrow can be confused with the white-throated because they have those nice barring on their crown. However, they lack that white throat. So really easy to distinguish the two if you look for that white throat. And then our American tree sparrow. They only are found here in the wintertime. They have a bicolored beak, so that yellow base, that black top, and they have a spot on their chest. Again, winter ground feeding bird. Red-breasted nuthatch. Commonly seen in the wintertime, not so much any other time of the year. They're often in coniferous forests. They like pine nuts, but you'll find them here in the winter. They'll come down from Canada when the weather gets too bad. and they're going to be eating that black oil sunflower seed. They're going to be eating suet, peanuts, things with high fat as well. And then our snow bunting. So our snow bunting, as the name may suggest, they are from the north. They are tundra species as well, and we'll find them here in the wintertime. They are, again, birds of the tundra. They like to be in open areas, and they like to feed on the ground. They're very, very fun to see, and usually you'll get them in large flocks, and oftentimes in areas that are like really, really bare. So like you'll see them at the edges of parking lots in the gravelly areas. At Maumee Bay State Park, we get them by the lake on the beach, right in that first parking lot there. Heinz skin. They look very similar to the goldfinches, except they're going to be a lot more heavily streaked version of it. They'll come in huge, huge flocks as well, and they are super duper cold tolerant. But they're really fun to see. And they're oftentimes you'll find them mixed with the house finches and with the goldfinches. Brown creeper is an insectivore. However, in the wintertime, it goes more to the higher fat, so on suet feeders. And oftentimes you'll see it poking around into really heavily barked trees looking for any bugs that are trying to hibernate. And then of course, you'll get the non-natives. So birds you'll see here at your feeders in the wintertime, house sparrows and starlings are going to be the two most common non-natives that you see. Unfortunately, they both also love suet. Starlings will obliterate your suet feeders. So that's something, if you are having problems with starlings, you might need to pull the foods that they're really liking, like the suet, for a while until they move on and find other sources of food. As I mentioned, bird bath, heated bird bath, super important. Providing water in the wintertime when everything's iced over. There's a variety, some that you can actually just put an element inside an already existing bird bath. You can actually use heated dog bowls as well. Those work really, really well. And as you can see, that's basically what this blue one is over here that purple finches are bathing in. Birds aren't going to, they're not going to get too wet if they know it's too cold. So don't worry about a bird turning into an icicle because it's deciding to have a bird bath in the wintertime. They do know their bodies, and they do know the cold winter, like how cold it is to get if it's too cold to bathe. This is a really good chart, different bird seeds, what birds it will attract, and what birds to avoid. So it gives you a rank of, the one on the left gives you a nice kind of idea, it's a nice grid. The one on the right gives you a ranking of what they prefer. So oftentimes you'll see, if you'll notice, black oil sunflower seed is pretty highly ranked on almost all the birds. So if you're looking for something that almost everybody will like, go for the black oil sunflower seed. And here's an example of a DIY bird feeder. Super easy. Peanut butter, bird seed, paper towel roll, toilet paper roll. Roll it in peanut butter, roll the seeds in it, put it outside, the birds will be happy. And the nice part is, especially if you're using toilet paper roll or a paper towel roll, it ends up being biodegradable. And then I know that was a lot of information thrown at you very fast. I appreciate your patience today. Do y'all have any questions?
There were some questions in the chat feature that I can read for you. So Janice was asking that, let's see, she's been feeding the birds and squirrels suet, sunflower seeds, and millet. She cannot get the millet, and they said it was a bad year for it, according to where she buys the millet from. Any alternatives to millet that are reasonably priced?
So trying to think, some sunflower seed is going to be the, sunflower seed is going to be the basically the all around one, the black oil sunflower seed. However, thistle is also a good one for the smaller birds. You'll get the finches that will eat it, as well as some of the other birds, some of the ground feeding birds will also eat it. Some of the sparrows will. Yeah, it can be really hard to find certain plants, certain seasons, certain seeds, just depending on how the weather was. So that doesn't surprise me that millet's been hard to find. My best guess would just be that black oil sunflower seed is such a generalist feeder attractant. I would stick with that until you can get millet.
Yeah. Okay. And then Carlton asked about the rain garden areas.
Yes.
He said, any recommendations on what to plant that does not, in an area that doesn't receive much sun?
Cardinal flower. Cardinal flower is going to be awesome for that area. So it doesn't need a lot of sun. It actually will not grow in full sun very well. It has red tubular flowers that hummingbirds absolutely love. So cardinal flower would be a really good one for that. Another one would be swamp milkweed. So it doesn't need a lot of sun and it tolerates being in a very wet area. The only thing with swamp milkweed, it can spread and take over. So if you're wanting something to stay a little more contained, I would maybe plant swamp milkweed in a pot in the ground so the rhizomes can't spread like crazy. But cardinal flowers can be a really good one. Blackeyed Susan rudbeckia will tolerate the outer edges really well. Those will be good ones. And if you're looking for something that maybe gets bigger, button bush. Button bush will grow in almost full shade and it likes to be in saturated soils. So, and it gets about 6 feet high and about 8 feet wide. So it's big, but it's slow growing. So you're not going to get a huge plant immediately, but you can get a plant that will grow over the years in a dark, wet place really well.
Mm-hmm. So I had a question as well. So we had a red-headed woodpecker that we saw once last year. And I hear that they're pretty rare.
Yes.
Is there a way to keep them in our yard or do they not really stick around here?
They are really hard to keep. So we have a breeding pair here at Maumee Bay. I've only seen them come to the feeders 2 times in 5 years.
Okay.
Providing woodpecker food is about the only way you can really encourage them, and it's going to be hit or miss. Peanut butter, suet, peanuts are going to be something that you'll have to provide. It's going to be really hit or miss with them. Now, if you were on the outside of Oak Openings Metro Bar, I'd say basically if you throw any food out there, you'll get them because they have an overabundance for the most part. They are very, very scarce in most of the state. And so to get them to your feeder can be really hard. But woodpecker food, peanut butter, peanuts, and suet.
Yeah, we bought our suet feeder after we saw that bird, but I think he was already gone by the time we got it out. So
but you never give up hope. You never know, he might just show right back up, or you'll get a pileated woodpecker, which those are amazing. Size of crows.
Right. All right, Janice and Carlton, did you have any other questions before we let Lauren go? Oh, what is the, how do they find that chart that you showed us?
I can send it to you guys if you'd like.
Perfect. Yes.
I'll actually send you the whole PowerPoint.
Okay.
So you'll be able to reference it, but I'll send that chart for sure. A lot of different seed companies actually have specific charts on there. Those two were the most, some of the seeds companies are like, oh, our seed's good for everything. This was the most realistic of what the seed was good for.
Okay.
I'll send it to you. Cornell Lab of Ornithology has a really good feeding chart as well for their Project Feeder Watch. Okay. That is available free, or if you want to do, they also do a Feeder Watch program all summer where you can record and do citizen science. And I think it's like $15 and they'll send you a whole bunch of information, but they do have free stuff as well. But Cornell Lab of Ornithology is a good one to check out for resources, but I will send, Liz, I'll send you those charts.
Yes, perfect. I'll forward that to Janice and Carlton. And thank you.
Button bush was the one.
Yes, button bush. Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Lauren, for doing this. And I know you'll be joining us next month.
I do apologize again.
Yes, thank you for squeezing us in. We understand. So,
well, thank you so much. And you guys enjoy this wonderful weather we're having. It's not raining. It's almost mild for December. And
right.
Enjoy the holiday season. If I don't see, actually, I will be seeing you on Monday for the Lighthouse tour.
Oh, okay. You'll be doing the Lighthouse
tour. So,
okay.
Yeah, I'll see you guys on Monday for the.
All right.
And maybe we'll see you in person in May.
I sure hope so. I'm get back up. I'm like, I miss people.
I already marked it on my calendar.
Good. I am so excited. I have food stockpiled to feed my birds in May. I'm like, oh, I'm ready for this.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. Have a good day, everybody.
Same to you.
Bye.
Bye.